Where does your dog sleep? By the door? At the foot of your bed? Somewhere he can watch the room while you sleep? For us, that's just a dog being a dog. But 5,500 years ago, on the Kazakh steppe, people were placing dogs at the edges of their homes, and then they buried them there. The strange part isn't just that they buried dogs, it's that we may never know why. The evidence. At a prehistoric settlement called Botai, archaeologists found the remains of at least 15 dogs in 13 separate deposits, along with 3 wolves. Some were found inside houses, others were placed beneath floors or beside walls, and several were associated with unusual pits near the western sides of houses. One deposit near house 139 contained an almost complete adult dog, accompanied by horse bones. At house 33, a dog was buried alongside horse skulls. And elsewhere, a dog cranium was found resting directly on a horse cranium. These weren't simply animals that happened to die where people lived. Someone decided where these dogs would remain. And that decision is where the mystery begins. Why bury a dog beneath a house? Why place one beside a wall? And why, in some cases, at the western edge of the settlement? We have to be careful here. There are only a small number of clear western deposits, and we cannot even be certain where every Botai house entrance was. So the evidence does not allow us to say, they buried dogs in the west because they believed the west was the land of the dead. That would be a story, not a discovery. But there is something interesting waiting behind the evidence, because much later, in Indo-Iranian traditions, dogs appear at another kind of boundary. The boundary between the living and the dead. The dogs of the dead. In the Rig Veda, Yama, the lord associated with the dead, is accompanied by 2 dogs. They watch over the path of the dead. Later traditions preserve variations of the same image, dogs guarding thresholds, roads, and boundaries associated with death. And suddenly, the Botai burials look different. A dog at the edge of a house, sometimes associated with horses, sometimes placed on the western side. Thousands of years later, dogs appear again at the boundary of the world of the dead. It's an extraordinary resemblance. But resemblance is not proof. Botai was not simply an early version of the later Indo-Iranian world. The population history is different, and the chronological gap is enormous. So we aren't looking at a proven chain of transmission. We're looking at a pattern. And a pattern is not automatically a tradition. The horse and the dog. There is another detail that makes Botai even stranger. The dogs repeatedly appear alongside horses, and horses dominate the settlement itself. Botai is one of the key sites in the archaeology of early horse use, although the story is more complicated than the simple idea that these people were the ancestors of modern domestic horses. But culturally, horses were clearly central to life here. The horse moved with humans across the steppe. The dog stayed close to the human settlement. One carried people across the landscape. The other guarded the boundary of home. And sometimes, in the archaeological record, they ended up together. At House 33, a dog's remains were placed among horse remains. At another location, dog and horse skulls were directly associated. Was this practical? Ritual? Symbolic? We don't know. And that's exactly the problem. Archaeology is very good at telling us what happened to an object. It can tell us where a skeleton was found, whether the body was complete, what was buried beside it, how deep the pit was, whether the deposit was inside a house or outside it. But archaeology has a much harder question to answer. What did it mean? We have the bones, we have the houses, we have the pits, we have the horses, we have the objects. What we don't have is the person who made the decision. We cannot ask them why they put a dog there. And this is where ancient religion becomes dangerous territory. Because once we recognize a pattern, our minds want to complete it. Dog, boundary, west, horse, death, we connect the dots. But the people of Botai never left us the lines between them. The threshold. Maybe these dogs were guardians. Maybe some were foundation offerings. Maybe their burial marked a particular moment in the life of a house. Maybe the meaning changed depending on the dog, the location, or the people who buried it. We simply don't know. What we do know is that these animals were not always treated like ordinary refuse. Someone chose where they would remain, and that choice seems to have mattered. Which brings us back to something very familiar. Your dog still knows the boundaries of your home. The door, the yard, the room where everyone gathers. The place between inside and outside. We don't know whether the people of Botai imagined their dogs guarding the dead. We don't know whether the western side of a house carried a special meaning, and we cannot prove that their beliefs survived into later traditions. What we know is simpler. 5,500 years ago, someone placed a dog at the threshold and decided that was where it belonged. The bones survived. The belief didn't. Or perhaps it did. And we're simply missing the evidence. If you want to keep following the traces of what humanity forgot, subscribe to Kamtorak. There are still stories buried beneath the evidence.